A common morality is one that all people have in common. Most often this takes the form of human rights. This lecture looks at debates about common morality. It has two parts. The first part looks at issues about the cultural particularity of moral standards. The second part looks at the basis for objective morality in Catholic moral tradition. Do people have a common morality, a shared set of moral standards to uphold? Or does morality differ so significantly between people with different cultures from one place to another, or from one person to another, that we cannot really speak of a common morality? Questions about a common morality become more pressing following the Second World War and with the decline of imperialism. During this historical time frame, European countries withdraw from their colonies and, in the context of Cold War polarization, newly independent states choose between alignment with the USSR as Marxist communist states or with NATO as capitalist democratic states. In Central America and Southeast Asia, during proxy wars fought within former colonies, both revolutionary forces and government-aligned forces violently target civilians. During this era in history, the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which proclaims universal ethical standards, marks a major development of humanitarian ethics and a reference point for human rights advocates. By the 1980s, emerging economic powers such as the People's Republic of China pushed back against what they call a Western conception of human rights. By the 1960s and 70s, birth control technology sparks a sexual revolution. Feminist social movements and then LGBTQ rights movements gain ground in wealthy countries and expand into the developing world. These challenges to traditional cultural values encounter pushback among people who see them as immorality cloaked in the ethical language of individual liberty, or as a cultural form of Western imperialism. Among these debates, a number of criticisms of a common morality emerge. These critiques themselves face challenges. I'll leave the screen up to give you a chance to read. Then we will look at two of these debates more closely. Postmodern and anti-imperial criticisms say that claims of universal morality support the domination of minority groups by the powerful. The gist of this criticism says that dominant social groups sustain their power by controlling the majority of a society's institutions, including the cultural institution we call morality. The cultures and practices of the dominating group get called morally right, and people from less powerful or minority groups are not just seen as different, they are branded immoral, or worse, perverted. The political power of the dominating group is called just, and people who challenge the dominant group get labeled as agitators who disrupt good social order. While postmodern critics call universal ethics a form of unjust domination, history sometimes gives us a more complex story. People with less power have adopted the language of human rights to build support for their political aspirations. The idea of human rights emerges in 18th century Europe. Within a generation, women start to argue that their right to vote is a human right. And in Haiti, a rebellion of enslaved people uses human rights language to argue for the right of self-government. Though human rights may be a European invention, it sometimes gives people a language that's widely recognized to share their story with a broader audience. A second criticism of common moral standards is called cultural relativism. Cultural relativism holds that each culture has its own moral code. Some relativist arguments say it is wrong for one culture to impose its moral code on people from another culture because it violates their cultural rights. For example, it would be wrong for feminism to argue for the rights of women if a culture's traditional roles for women focus on housekeeping and raising children. Proponents of a common morality notice that cultures develop over the course of history. They argue that it would be ethically arbitrary to draw a line at the present moment and say that any historical development of culture before this moment is morally acceptable, and that any development that comes after that is unjust. Relationships across cultural groups often serve as a source for cultural innovation. When people raise ethical criticisms about a culture's values, they're making an argument that a culture should develop. Proponents of common morality say that movements for cultural development that emerge from within a culture would not be called unjust domination. So, when social movement leaders who draw inspiration from human rights or from examples they see in other countries act out of their own freedom, they're not violating freedom, they're enacting it. Though when someone who is not from a cultural community objects to a community's practices, different ethical tensions emerge. If the objection comes in the context of dialogue, it's one thing. When it comes with an imposition of an unwanted practice from an outside community, it's another. For example, education for girls can become a contested issue. In a minority community with a practice of arranging girls into marriage after 6th grade, few girls complete elementary school, and even fewer attend high school. If the country's national government decides that education should be required through 8th grade, a tension emerges between cultural traditions and equal education for girls, and this tension is not resolved easily. What are Catholic claims about a common morality? Catholic tradition emphasizes strongly the need to respect human dignity. Following the Second World War, the Catholic Church becomes a strong advocate for democratic government. Among the countries who gain independence as imperialism recedes in the late 20th century, those that are majority Catholic most often become democracies. In the Catholic Church's official teaching about social issues following the Second World War, bishops advocate for human rights. We see this most clearly in Pope John XXIII's encyclical Peace on Earth, Pacem in Terris. We find in this publication a list of human rights that include social and political rights, like the rights of free speech, free press, and assembly, and economic and cultural rights, like the right to work, to education, and to access health care. Our human rights in Catholic tradition correlate with responsibilities. In other words, all people have a responsibility to help any other human being fulfill their rights. When people from different cultural and religious traditions disagree about what's right or wrong, just or unjust, Catholic social teaching promotes dialogue about questions such as the significance we honor in each person, how to respond to human suffering, and each person's responsibilities to contribute to society. In summary, a common morality is one that all people hold in common. Most often, this takes the form of human rights. People object to common morality for a range of reasons. Some people think ethics is particular to a given culture. Others remain skeptical about an objective basis for any moral knowledge. Issues that impact the cultural rights of minority groups cannot be resolved easily. Catholic tradition thinks the best response should be dialogue about how to respect human beings and about the responsibilities we have to our society.